Hello and good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar. So tonight's webinar, we are talking about fat loss. How do we lose it? What's going on? How does my DNA play into that factor? And little hint, yes, it does play a factor. Does it determine that you will definitely be heavy and can never lose the weight, or that you'll be skinny and you're just, won the genetic lottery? No, it does play a factor, but the nice thing is that there is still the aspect that you control, that you can control how your genes are presented, how they are expressing. So that is in your control. And that's what we're going to learn about tonight. And I have the wonderful, just brilliant Justin Harris. I love working with this guy. He's just amazing. Great practitioner here at the DNA Company. And welcome, Justin. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much, Dr. Laura. And by the way, you are such a boss. I love working with you as well. One of the smartest humans I've ever met, hands down. And we have so much fun working together. I love this topic too, because it's like, to me, a textbook example of this whole idea of your energy, thoughts, and actions having to be in alignment with the end result that you want. We have these genetic factors, and then we've also got these behavioral traits, and we have to align everything in order to really get where you want to go. So your new life is going to cost you your old one, right? This is one of those things where we have to get some new habits, and once that identity shift starts to really happen, the results are phenomenal from there. So I'm really looking forward to diving in to the genes and the tips and tricks and things that you and I have both accumulated over the years that we've been doing this as practitioners.
And, not just the years we've been doing helping others, but I don't know about you, but I have implemented the knowledge from my DNA for myself, especially, as an older female, transitioning from perimenopause to menopause. And yeah, that does play a factor. But knowing my own genes, the ones that we're going to be focusing on a little bit more tonight, can be found in the diet nutrition reports. So, I don't have the best genes when it comes to that. And, I'll mention a few as we are talking about them. But the thing is, the empowerment of knowing them and actually implementing, and I love to play with it, to test things out. That scientist in me, it's like, oh, if I do this, if I change this, if I tweak this, how is that going to how's my body going to respond to that? And it's absolutely amazing to see the results. Or, when I start getting stressed and eat and, not be consistent with my exercise, and that scale that little starts going up, and I'm like, oh, then, kind of leaning back in and going, okay, these are my genes. This is what I have to do. This is what I know works. Let's try some of this. So know that even even people, what we do this every day, we still can fall into, some of the little road bumps and stresses of life. What about you, Justin? How have you used your DNA and working on, keeping your weight stabilized and
Absolutely. And believe it or not, I mean, I consider myself an absolute shapeshifter. Like I've had many, many different iterations of what my physique has done and looked like. I mean, I remember my first time getting into like powerlifting and things like that. And I ate like a power lifter and I looked like one too. I was 230 or something like that. And I was just very strong and big brutish individual, but I didn't really feel metabolically healthy at that point because it was just all about getting that caloric surplus in there and lift heavy weights and eat lots of food and lift heavy weights and eat lots of food. And now arriving at more of a hybrid athletic place, I feel a lot happier, and I really incorporated my genes. I tailored my training. I tailored a whole bunch of stuff. Improving detox capacity, improving sleep helped a lot. So we're going to dive into this from a few different angles tonight, because it's not just a N=1 circumstance either, as with most of the things that we talk about. If we can really get your body metabolically healthy, having a good quality body composition tends to kind of happen as a byproduct of that alignment process. Bodybuilders and athletes, I mean, that's all biohacking. It's like you build muscle, or you get fat, you get strong, you get skinny, you get good endurance. All of these things are just biohacking, and we only control the epigenetic input, right? So I mean, that's what we focus on. What are we doing? Energy, thoughts, and actions in alignment with the result that we're looking to attain.
And I have to also say another word: consistency.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
not perfection. Okay, there's a difference, but consistency. That's when you really start seeing results. So, well, there is a poll that I hope everyone filled out, because we really do pay attention to these. We want to tailor the information that we provide for you real time on what is it that you're looking for, and who our audience is. So thank you, Vanny, for bringing up the poll question. You are right on top of it. So our first question was, have you ever taken a DNA or genetic test? So, either ours or someone else's. And 90% of you said yes. Another 10% of you said no, but you're curious. Well, I hope that that curiosity will be whetted tonight for you to actually take that step into getting it to have the knowledge to take that next step for personalized health. Second question was, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to losing weight? And this really is right around even across the board, but our winner is that you don't know. Most of us, it's like, I don't know what's holding me back, really. It could be any one of those. And our next, highest answer was slow metabolism. But like I said, the rest, pretty much straight across the board, whether it's the emotional eating and stress, something, that I deal with and have dealt with in the past. Hormonal imbalances, yeah, again, something I've personally dealt with in the past. Lack of energy, motivation, all of these things. And I will say, in some way, shape, or form, all of these things play a factor, but it's finding out which one is your biggest stumbling block right now. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just take it one step at a time, make one change at a time, and start building. So our third question, how familiar are you with the idea that your genes affect how your body stores fat or burns energy? And overwhelmingly, most of you have heard about it. You're somewhat familiar, but you want to learn more. We've got 11% of you that said you're very familiar. You read the studies, you consult experts. That is fantastic. I'm so glad you are here. I hope you learn something new while you're here, that you can take away from and start synthesizing that into the research that you've already done. And we've got 20% that said that you're not familiar. This is new to you. Well, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. And, what's wonderful is that this is recorded. This is being recorded. So if you're taking notes and trying to write all this stuff down, take your notes, but also allow yourself to listen and process. And you can always come back and watch our recording on our YouTube channel, on our app, the DNA Way app. We do have this available as soon as it's published, so you can access it anytime. And our last question, which of these areas are you most interested in learning how your DNA affects? And this was a select all that applies. And our top winner, fat metabolism. What's going on with our DNA and fat metabolism? And second runner-up was detoxification pathways. And yes, that's very important, because boy, I'll tell you, you have a toxic load that you're not able to clear and supporting well enough, that is going to inhibit your ability to lose fat efficiently. And then after that, our next runner-up was hormones. So estrogen, cortisol. So these are things that we're definitely going to be touching on. And then after that, there was an even break between appetite cravings, exercise recovery, and performance. So, well, we know what we are going to be focusing on. And I'm just making a couple notes here.
A lot of those things are also related, right? I mean, it's like typically what I find is that if someone has some sort of issue as far as that stubborn just holding on to body fat, usually there's more than one moving factor, right? And the more of those areas that we can kind of get in alignment, it's like there's the calories in, calories out side of things, which I don't go so far as to say is irrelevant. I know that some practitioners do. I think it's absolutely relevant. I just think that between A and Z, there's a lot of chemical processes going on there, right? So if you have the ideal ratio going on with calories in, calories out, but you've got this huge imbalance in your stress and your sex hormones, for example, or you've got a lot of gut issues, or you've got a lot of detoxification issues, such that your gallbladder and your liver aren't really doing their job and circulating bile around so that you can digest things properly. I just think that it adds a wrench in that, like the amount of calories you're taking in are far more likely to be stored as fat as opposed to properly metabolized and used by your mitochondria, used by your brain, used by your muscles. So again, that's why I always say alignment process, because we have to make every one of these systems work as best as we can. And then we have genes that are really specific to the metabolism of different macronutrients and things. So that's our approach. We align as many of these things as possible. And the default setting of your body is to have a high quality body composition. So we try to restore that default setting.
So let's talk about the genes that are involved in resetting that default system, in fat metabolism, we'll get into detoxification, but let's talk about fat metabolism. Can you please, what gene do you want to start off with?
So I'll start with the one that I do start with typically when it comes to these conversations with clients. I beeline it to a gene called TCF7L2 just because it's really going to be of relevance when it comes to the dialing in of your macronutrients. Because when you have a suboptimal TCF7L2, you have like a 1.5 greater times insulin response when it comes to the intake of certain macronutrients, right? So it's like this whole thing about glucose homeostasis, right? And just glycemic variability is way harder to get under control if the insulin mechanism is broken, suboptimal at a genetic level. I've seen people that have TCF7L2 be suboptimal and they're fully on a ketogenic diet and they can't lose a pound. Those are those people, right? Because the body is still creating those insulin responses just because of the fat bombs and the butter coffee and things that work fantastic for other people. When you have that dysregulation there, your blood sugar is going up and down, and it's really hard to control that glycemic response, right? So if that's suboptimal, I work on getting a lot of different little protocols in place to make sure that we're sort of regulating that mechanism. And that can be anything from, resistance training to a little bit of cold exposure can help with the blood glucose. I was talking to Dr. Laura about this prior to this, but I'm actually a big fan of like postprandial walks, like literally just going for a 10-minute walk after your meals. It tends to help stabilize that mechanism. Then there's nutraceutical ways that you can go about that as well, right? With things like berberine and Ceylon cinnamon, and there's different nutraceutical adaptogenic ways that you can help to control that as well. But I found that that's pretty common when people are dysregulated for TCF7L2. It's harder to get those macros on point. What about you? Is that one that you go towards first of all?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to see how does the body respond, the insulin respond to the food being eaten. I mean, really, when you consider carbohydrates. So, and people, I want to be very clear about this. Carbohydrates is a large family, which includes not just starches, okay, breads and pastas and all kinds of things like that. It also includes vegetables and fruits, because all it is, it's a whole bunch of sugar molecules together, whether it is more of fast carb, which are your starches, or your complex carbohydrates, which are your vegetables and your fruits, but they're all carbohydrates. They all break down to these basic sugar molecules. And what does your body do with it? The whole point is when it gets into the bloodstream, it is insulin that helps to open the door to get that glucose from the bloodstream into the cells where it's needed for the energy. How sensitive is it? How well does it do that job? And this is where the TCF7L2 comes in. So, when we're talking about fat metabolism, okay, it's how your body metabolizes, stores, and burns the fat, okay? And so for the TCF7L2, again, this is a key regulator of glucose and lipid metabolism, mainly through its influence on adipocytes, fat cells, and that gene expression. So, for the TCF7L2, it's really important that the sensitivity is there. And that's where we get into metabolic flexibility. Okay. How well does your body burn glucose or that sugar for fuel, as well as fat for fuel? Because remember that TCF7L2 affects the adipocyte size, okay, the fat cell size, fat storage, and fat breakdown, which is called lipolysis. And that influences your overall body composition. So, when you have reduced activity of this TCF7L2, which, by the way, this gene, the information on this gene can be found in the diet and nutrition reports. And you would be looking at a G version, or the G allele is the optimal allele, okay? The T allele is the suboptimal allele. And this will tell you how well your insulin response is, genetically speaking, and whether or not you are at risk for type 2 diabetes. But remember, just because it may increase your risk doesn't mean that you will definitely get it, okay? So if you have reduced TCF7L2 activity, so if you have a T allele in there, so if you are GT or a TT, all right, the activity in the fat tissue is linked to impaired, meaning not so good, fat metabolism. You would have greater fat mass, insulin resistance, and susceptibility to diet-induced obesity. So really, the TCF7L2 gene, that the function of it can make it harder to lose fat, especially with high fat diets, because it alters how fat is stored and released from fat tissue. Okay. So what would you say would be your next gene that you look at?
So once that's established, right, we know what the insulin response is going to look like. Then I like to pair that with the actual kind of zoomed in macronutrient genes as well, because then we're going to know, right, at least what kind of direction we should be steering the boat, so to speak. If you have, let's say, the suboptimal TCF7L2 as well as the suboptimal AMY1, which is what we look at, it's a salivary amylase gene, so it really dictates how well you metabolize starches. If that's also suboptimal, well, then it's a case where we're going to have to think about really drastically reducing starches from your diet and then relying more so on those kind of low glycemic fruits and veggies and things like that as your predominant carbohydrate source, but not going crazy with the rices and the breads and things like that. When we have both of those suboptimal, just know that you're going to be the type of person that really shouldn't be having those regularly unless you're trying to gain weight, which is obviously not what this webinar is about. So we look at AMY1 for starches, and then we look at APOA2 for lipids. Now, if that's completely suboptimal alongside a suboptimal TCF7L2, to me, that speaks that this person is not going to thrive, at least for a longer term, on more of a ketogenic diet or an Atkins diet, or even a higher fat carnivore or Mediterranean style diet. You're going to want to watch your fats, and you're also going to want to watch especially your saturated fats, those fats that are really solid at room temperature. you're not going to want to do a large portion of your fat being saturated in that case. You're probably better off on the inclusion of some of these, quote, Mediterranean fats, right? Like some avocado and a little bit of olive oil and maybe some sprouted and soaked nuts, something like that. A little bit of omega-3s in there, but you're not going to want to go crazy with saturated fats. So it's kind of a map, right? We look at the insulin response and then we look at those two macronutrients. Really, I mean, protein is obviously the third macronutrient there. And with that, I would say you're in a pretty good place if you're prioritizing that when it comes to fat loss, because it's not going to be as insulinogenic as the carbohydrates or the fats are going to be if you have that suboptimal TCF7L2. And then there's also something called the thermic effect of feeding, which you get from taking in protein, which basically means your body burns calories in order to kind of metabolize that protein, right? So you almost end up at more of a net negative when it comes to that particular intake. So I look at those three. It's a little trifecta of genes that really influence what your plate ought to look like.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just brilliant the way that you view and assess this, especially in the combinations. There's a question here as far as to explain the letters behind those two. So, okay, so we went over the TCF7L2. So for the AMY1 that he was talking about, so this is, again, the gene that creates the enzyme that breaks down dietary starches into the sugars at the start of the digestion in the mouth. There's also an AMY2, but that's works from the pancreas. So for AMY1, this is really interesting because for the alleles, so you're either going to have a T or an A, or some combination thereof. So T would be more of the optimal, A would be more of the suboptimal. But what this indicates is that there actually is a number of how many of these genes that you have. You can have anywhere from like 2 to 17 copies of the gene. So when you have a T allele, that indicates that you have more copies. So a TT would have more of, that 17 or that higher range. An AA would have more of that lower, more like, 2 or down there range. Okay. Everyone has them. It's not like you are at a loss of them because, well, obviously we have to break down carbohydrates, but how well are you doing that? So for the AMY1, really for people who have an A, either a TA or an AA, they have a decreased ability for breaking down the starches in the mouth. Okay. And the problem is that when you have undigested starches, okay, if your body is not breaking them down, that can actually lead to blood sugar swings in individuals, who have less copies. And that ends up putting them at a higher risk of storing excess dietary carbs as body fat. So that's, kind of that association in there. And I've worked with people, my daughter, she actually is dysregulated in that. And she knows when she eats breads, it's like she can look at, a nice loaf in a bakery and gain weight. And so she knows, not like she doesn't eat them ever. It's just she's much more strict on how much she eats, or, she really limits that because she doesn't want to have the excess weight gain. But this is something that she learned, with her DNA. And she's like, oh, well, that's why. Okay. And so she's more purposeful at that. So those are the alleles for the AMY1. For the ApoA2 that he was talking about, so this has to deal with association of fat gain with fat consumption. And with the ApoA2, this encodes a protein that's involved in lipid transport and fat metabolism, especially in relation to the high density lipoprotein, HDLs, okay, that the good, lipoprotein. And when you have alterations or variants in this particular gene, so the two alleles that you will see associated with the APO2 are A, which is the optimal, G, which is the suboptimal, okay? And When you have alterations in the metabolism of triglycerides, fatty acids, that can actually increase the risk of visceral fat gain. So the fat that's on the inside, that's around the organs, which is actually more detrimental when you're talking about fat gain, because there's also subcutaneous. That's more of what you see, some of the rolls and stuff. That's subcutaneous, meaning being right underneath the skin. But the visceral, that's under the muscles around the organs, and that's the dangerous thing. And these can actually increase, especially with high saturated fat intake, like Justin so brilliantly explained. And ApoA2 also helps to regulate satiety, that fullness that works in with FTO, which is the next gene that I wanted to bring up. So realizing that there are some variants that are linked to increased appetite and more fat accumulation, when you are dysregulated with a G or GG allele.
Yeah, and I was going to mention as well that, if you do have suboptimal metabolism of things like fatty acids, it doesn't mean we're going to bring it all the way down to zero, right? Because the body still requires them, regardless of the genetic metabolizing kind of component there. But what I would suggest is understanding what types are going to be better, and then just the different timing strategies and things that we have. And you can actually, in the interest of improving metabolic flexibility, you can utilize certain things like L-lipase. You can use things like L-carnitine because it helps to kind of push the fat into the mitochondria to assist acetyl-CoA and that whole beta oxidation cycle. So I just want to make sure that you don't get discouraged here, right? Like if you have suboptimal AME1, well, maybe it means that we just only have some starches after a workout. Or maybe we aim for only resistant starches, right? We cook and then we cool that rice and then we have a small amount of it there because it's still going to be lower glycemic. There's carb cycling. That's a great strategy. You can front or back load your carbohydrates. You can take amylase. I mean, there's different enzymes that you can use to help improve some of these kind of metabolizing effects. And really, I think that metabolic flexibility is a really good goal. But the option paralysis associated with trying to figure out how do I metabolize what without your genes, it's a friggin' nightmare. It's really just throwing gluten-free spaghetti at a wall, right? Like we want to make sure that we know what your body is designed for in the first place so that we know what need be reinforced from there. So again, having the genes handy means that we really have just that basic blueprint to work from, and we work forward with the blueprint instead of guessing and trying to mess around and say, I don't think I metabolize this well, but maybe, right? We got to get rid of the but maybe thing. We need to start doing, a little bit more diagnostic, tools and things that we have. And this is exactly what the genes are there for.
Yeah. And you say that so beautifully. It really works into the empowerment of the knowledge.
Yeah.
And, we have someone that had commented that they're all suboptimal. It's like, how did I manage to survive this long? Well, our bodies are brilliant. It's not that you're broken or that you're not going to survive because you may have some of these genes or, even all of them that we've mentioned suboptimal. These are just a small spattering, a few examples of genes that influence. You have thousands of genes, and there are a lot of other genes that help support and that also influence fat gain, fat loss, metabolic health. So you also have to consider that your genes, more so instead of just a light switch of turning them on and off, like a dimmer switch, that you have this much to work with. Yeah, somebody else may have this much to work with, but within that, you could upregulate or downregulate the expression of that gene. So, you probably have lived and done things and eaten foods and exercise that have been able to work within a functional range. But with this knowledge of your genes, we want to optimize. We are shining a light to show, hey, there's a whole bunch of dials here. I didn't know they were there. Oh, let's, okay, they're labeled. Hey, let's start turning them. Let's see how we can make those changes, see what happens when we do. And then when you find a combination that you like, stick with that. Does it mean that you will only be eating, the same, 3 meals for the rest of your life? No. Remember, we are dynamic beings. So we have a dynamic environment. We have seasonal changes, genetically speaking. And this goes back, to the Paleolithic, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Our genes haven't changed a whole lot. And, we didn't have all of the plethora and access to food like we do now. We had to eat with the seasons. We had to hunt. We had to forage. And so as dynamic beings, as a dynamic environment, we can't expect our food to be static. But if we know what our genes are, what works best for us, at least we'll know the spectrum within to work and to eat from that works best for your body to be in the most optimal way.
Yeah, and it's an incredible trickle down from the ancestral kind of component, right? Like what you landed with. Like there's such a incredible diversity even among people that were living in the same time period, like you go way north, I mean people were basically thriving on just animal fats and proteins and very scarce produce and veggies and stuff available. At that same time period, the Incans, like the Mayan Empire, they said that there was a type of potato for every disease, and they had over 2,000 different types of potatoes. And you're talking about a lot of starches and a lot of fructose, and most of their calories coming from carbohydrates. And yet they had really the same level of health as people that were eating pretty much no carbohydrates at the same time. So when we land on these genes and these genotypes, understand that it's just this trickle down effect from what that all was. You look at the Irish potato famine, and people were surviving on basically shoe leather at a certain point. So the human body is unbelievably adaptable. It's just a matter of let's find what's actually optimal for you so that you get the longevity, you get to enjoy your diet, and you have a healthy body composition at the same time.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, because I've seen a couple questions here, is this being recorded? Yes, absolutely. This, along with all of our other webinars, are available on our YouTube channel. They are available and accessible on our website, thednacompany.com. And I highly recommend downloading our app, The DNA Way. We have all of the information, being able to sign up for our upcoming webinars, being able to watch these webinars that we have done, being able to listen to our DNA Talks podcast episodes, as well as reading our DNA Talks digest. It's all there in one app, everything at one, in one place, so you can access all this information as well as your own DNA results. And fantastic information that you can garner and learn from within that app. So it's all right there. Highly recommend. Also, for those of you who had said that you haven't done a DNA test, we have available our DNA 360 test. If you want to learn more, if you want to know what your genes are that we've been talking about, that's the way to get it. So we have our team, Vanny, and we also have some salespeople here. We've got Bill, Jonathan, that can answer questions, that can help you to get these things, to learn more, so that way you can turn those small dials and empower yourself to optimize your own health.
Yeah, leverage it all, right? And we've also done a lot of webinars about a lot of really relevant areas as well that we likely won't go super deep into tonight. Like if you have detoxification issues, I mean, your genes can certainly highlight a lot of those areas. And we've done tons of webinars just about that, like more zoomed in on some of these topics, or like methylation, or lots of different webinars about sex hormones and how that whole pathway kind of looks genetically. The more of these areas that you can leverage, the better your metabolism is ultimately going to be, because there's so many connective points between the different systems of the body.
And we've also done it on sleep. Sleep is foundational. You had mentioned it at the beginning of this webinar, how important sleep is when it comes to weight loss. And it also affects your hormones. And we're not just talking about testosterone, estrogen, which yes, they do, okay, but they also affect the hunger hormones, ghrelin, leptin, and the balance between them. And we've actually dove into this more deeply in some of our sleep webinars, actually ones that I have done. So, definitely taking a look. By the way, so there was a quick question not showing on the Apple App Store. Actually, I have an iPhone. So if you type in the DNA way, I will assure you it is there. We can always have, maybe our team can give something to help find that. But yes, but you do have to put in the DNA way. That's the name of the app. Okay, so there's a couple other genes that I wanted to mention because they do affect when we talk about hormones and ghrelin and leptin and sleep and our relationship to food and that postprandial information transfer from gut to brain saying, hey, I'm full, okay, that actually is one of the most notorious genes, most highly studied genes when it comes to obesity. So Justin, you want to talk about that gene?
Yeah, I believe you're referencing FTO, which is, it's actually called the fat and obesity gene. Like we just talked about, there's many moving parts to this, and I don't really love it when there's like a really harsh name like that. The Alzheimer's gene, the obesity gene. Well, not really, right? This is a map. We don't want to do fear mongering on here. We want to do empowerment. So it's a different thing. But the FTO gene is of relevance for this conversation because there's a signal that gets sent from your gut to your brain when you start chewing down food. And that signal is there to say, okay, we've had enough calories, like we're good to go. And so when someone has dysregulation in that FTO gene, it really represents having a slower signal there to where by the time it hits your brain, that signal that says, no more, we're good, you've already gone back, right? You've already had the extra helping, the second or the third serving, or maybe the eighth serving in Justin's case, because I do have a suboptimal FTO. And I have family members that actually thought I had a tapeworm at one point because I can just keep going and keep going. Like it's actually really crazy. And one thing that's really interesting, and we're not going to get super deep into the mood and behavior profile tonight, but I've noticed a pattern for sure when people are dysregulated, these satiety genes, and then they're also high dopamine binders. It seems pretty common that food happens to be that vice of choice, right? So it's like we look at the dopamine pathway for addiction properties and binging, tendencies. When you're also dysregulated for satiety, it seems like that's something that people tend to select food. That's such an openly available vice now, and we can see it all over the place. So, FTO, if it is dysregulated, it means that we want to do a little extra work when it comes to portioning of your meals. Personally, I'm a really big fan of even just simple tactics like gratitude surrounding your meals. You don't have to be religious to have a gratitude practice, right? I'm not necessarily saying prayer, but that taking that time with that meal before you actually start eating it, to be aware of it and put your digestive system in a parasympathetic and a receptive state can make a big difference with that whole signaling process as well. And then, other little tactics, right, as far as the prioritization of protein, because it tends to be more filling. You can always do things like shots of ketones. There's things like Garcinia cambogia. That's an appetite suppressant used in Chinese medicine. There's a few little things that I throw in there when people are dysregulated for FTO. Then there's one really closely related to FTO, which if you would like to, you can go ahead and describe because you're fantastic at it, called MC4R, which is kind of the same idea. You want to go ahead and tackle that one?
Sure. So when we're talking about MC4R, this really acts in the brain to regulate appetite and energy homeostasis. So what exactly does this mean? I want to touch on FTO really quick because they're kind of, in a way, like cousins working together. Okay. Where FTO is more of that satiation. Okay. Your gut telling your brain, hey, I'm full, stop eating. Which, by the way, I have the worst dysregulation in the FTO gene. And I do want to mention, because I'm sure people are going to be like, well, which alleles, what does the presentation look like? So for the FTO, the A allele is dysregulated. The T allele is optimal. Okay. So I have a double A. So this is something that I have to be very aware of. And I am going to touch on this because, I mean, Justin so beautifully gave some ideas on what you can do. And I want to work off of that because I know I've got a lot of clients who their FTO genes are dysregulated. And it's just, you almost feel victim to emotions and to just like food. That it's hard to stop. And then when you finally do, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to explode, food baby, that type of thing. But so the FTO is more of that, the satiation, okay, the satiety, the fullness. MC4R is more the satisfaction, okay? So it does work on, again, that brain regulation, but it's how you are feeling of going, okay, I may be full or I'm eating, but I'm just not satisfied. I need like salty, crunchy, or I need smooth and creamy. I need sweet. I need, even if you've eaten a full meal and you're full, you're just like, but I need something more. And this can be problematic because this really works into that, the hunger cues, the snacking. People who are dysregulated with the MC4R, which would be like a C allele. This is the dysregulated gene or the dysregulated allele, where the T is optimal. But you will find that your hunger cues are off, or still having those cravings, still wanting that snacking because it works into texture, and you tend to lean in. If you are craving something salty, well, it might mean that your body needs more sodium. Okay, but you don't want to be going to that bag of chips. I mean, if you look at serving size, and that bag of chips is like 10 chips, 100 calories or so, tell me really, when you open up a bag of chips, how many people count out 10 chips and only eat that? Not me.
No.
I mean, I'd be like, nah, if that bag stays open, I'm going to be eating near the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of having awareness. Okay. It's a matter of realizing, are you truly hungry? What is the trigger? What is it that's going on? Because a lot of times you could be thirsty. It could be an emotional trigger. Why are you, after you've eaten a decent meal, why are you feeling that you need more? Okay. Again, it could be a dysregulated MC4R gene, or some of these other genes playing for a factor, but it doesn't mean you have to be victim to them. And it's that, again, it's that awareness going, okay, I would love that Ben and Jerry's. Oh, that looks so cool and soothing, especially in the summertime, and it tastes so good, even though a pint is like 1,100 calories. Instead of going to that, saying, okay, what else can I do? Let me drink some water. Let me go for a walk, like what Justin was talking about. And then if I'm still hungry, let me figure out why. Again, if you've had a good meal, why? Is it emotional? Do you need that dopamine hit? Then start working through. But again, the empowerment of knowing your genes and going, okay, it's having that curiosity of understanding, okay, it's not great. Like mine, my AA, version of my FTO. Yeah, it sucks because put me in front of a buffet, especially if I'm hungry, forget about it. I could eat anybody under the table. But it is putting in techniques where you don't do that. Because, if I end up eating a lot and not thinking about it, not taking the time, like what Justin's saying, and, whether you're praying or over your food, taking the time, eating slowly, allowing the gut to tell the brain, hey, I'm full. Okay. Paying attention, being mindful really makes a difference. Maybe if you go to a buffet or a wedding, okay, take a small plate and just do a few things and go, okay, I'm going to stop here. All right. That really helps. Another thing is having water before you eat and putting a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Okay, that actually helps with blood sugar regulation, helps with the enzymes with the liver and breaking down the food. It helps to fill a little bit. Okay, so again, we are now tapping into the blood sugar regulation of the TCF7L2 gene, into the breakdown of the foods that you're actually eating so your body can use them, okay, not just store them for fat. And, putting in plans. It's not that you don't have the ability or that, I don't have the willpower. Now, I'm sure you are putting forth a lot of effort. What it is you don't have the right tools, the right systems. So we just need to start implementing the right systems. Did you have anything to add for that?
Yeah, and another advantage of doing the apple cider vinegar prior to the meal is that if you have a big glass of water without anything like that, you can kind of suppress some of your stomach acid prior to taking in protein, and that's a bad call in some ways, right? Because when you require that HCl to really break down and get the requisite amino acids out of that protein and prevent that putrefaction of it, right? Like we know that protein will sit there and effectively ferment if you don't have enough acid and things in there to break it down. So I don't like guzzling lots of water prior to a protein heavy
Right.
meal without having something like an apple cider vinegar present, because we don't want to suppress that. I'll tell you another strategy that I work on a lot with people is like finding alternatives to some of their favorite snacks. Like you mentioned, Ben and Jerry's. I like to try to make it so that this is a sustainable practice. So a piece of homework I'll give people is, well, let's find a little alternative to the things that you really do enjoy. And then we kind of loop the dopamine system such that this is a reward for doing something positive for your health. And then we're finding a non-toxic alternative. Like if anybody in the audience knows what a Ninja Creamy is, it's like one of the most fantastic inventions ever. It's like the company Ninja, right? They make all those blenders. They make a certain type of blender that's specifically for making ice cream, but you do it with like your own ingredients. So you would put in like, coconut milk or something and some frozen fruit and some, protein powder. And you freeze it beforehand, but the way it blends it, it makes the texture and everything exactly like ice cream. So I'm a big fan of like finding little swaps, this for that. I'll do like I'm a friggin' people in the chat are saying they have one of those. Fantastic. Like I'm a big fan of even Zevias and things like that. I know some people are like, oh, well, you don't know what natural flavors means and this and that. I know, but what I am saying is the data shows that when we have a calorie-free version where the alternative is a full-on pop, right? That is in fact full of however many tablespoons of actual sugar is in there. All I'm saying is if we swap this for that, that's a step in the right direction and you don't hate your life, right? So I'll find like, just a brand of popcorn that's like got ghee instead of margarine and sea salt instead of crappy table salt. These little things to where if I am going to indulge, at least I know that I'm reducing my toxin load and I'm probably going to have better and healthier metabolic response to that just because it's not totally poisonous. So that's a great piece of homework. Find what your vice is and let's see if we can swap it out for something that's overall going to serve your body better. And I'm willing to bet there's a lot of substitutions if you really look.
Oh, my daughter is famous for making yummy, healthy desserts. You know, she actually does something like what you're talking about in the ninja smoothies. And she'll use like peanut butter and chocolate protein powder and frozen bananas and, making this beautiful, delicious concoction, that's a lot healthier and just absolutely amazing. And, honestly, you're as limited as your imagination and as your resourcefulness to go out and find products. And I will tell you, I love the fact that, with biohacking and healthy living and, organic foods are becoming more mainstream. I mean, when you can go to a Walmart and they have, in several sections, they've got organic, produce and meats and, a bunch of different healthier choices. That's really nice to see. So it is more accessible. So again, just, get out there and take a look and start finding some good alternatives.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. There's a meme that about the health food section, and it's like, well, this is the health food section. What's the rest of this store filled with? And it's like one little section in this gigantic store, and it's called the health food section. It kind of makes you wonder. The superfood ice cream thing is fantastic as well because you can sneak little stuff in there. Like I'll put grass-fed colostrum in there. Like you can make any kind of recipe you want.
right.
Right. So like even if it's just a normal smoothie, like I'll fill it up with superfoods, but I mean I'm drinking something absolutely delicious. So it's a way of really hacking it and making it so that each and every time that you have a feeding, you're paying attention to the ingredients and you're making each one of them as nourishing as possible. Like same with my coffee. If I'm going to break my fast with my coffee, there's no reason not to load that up with superfoods. It's not like I'm going to have breakfast and I'm going to wash it down with my coffee. It's like coffee represents an intake. This is an epigenetic input. Let's fill it up with some minerals and some functional mushrooms and things that are going to impact your physiology and get the metabolism going for the day. Everything you put in your mouth, food, I'm saying, is an opportunity to actually nourish your body or to poison it, right? That's the spectrum that we're operating on. So just really break down everything that you eat and make it the best case scenario that you can.
And we've got some people who mentioned some of the things that they make. Jessica was saying that she had the most amazing ice cream that she made with raw goat milk, cream, egg yolk, and pure maple syrup. That does sound amazing. And
Beautiful.
Faye said that she mixes refrigerated apple puree, tahini, and cinnamon together. That sounds really good. So we also have another question, or we have a question that's being asked. Helen is asking, is lactose intolerance a genetic issue and can it be reversed? So, because we've been talking a lot about dairy, okay? So,
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a genetic component. We actually do look at a gene for that. It's called MCM6, and it's got a lot to do with that lactose tolerance. And some people just genetically are wired to not continue making that lactase enzyme once they wean off mom's milk, right? So some people just stop making the enzyme right away. If you go right from mom's milk to like a really dairy heavy diet, some people can still kind of make it for a while. It's a bit of a gray area there. What I will say is that this isn't representative of dairy as a whole. It's really just zoomed in on the sugar in dairy, right? The actual lactose itself, because I've seen people still pretty well thrive on dairy that have suboptimal MCM6 only because they were targeting the lactose component, right? I mean, there's a lot of great nutrition that exists in dairy, but for some people, it's certainly got that sensitive component. And for some people, it's the casein. And for some people, it's the dairy fat. And for some people, it's the lactose. So I have a pretty full conversation usually with clients when it comes to dairy about should we include it? Should we not? Should it be A2 versus A1? Goat's milk, like was mentioned in the comments, there is a pretty good A2 source. But you can also use lactase enzyme. You can pretty easily get lactose-free versions of most yogurts, most cheeses, that kind of a thing. But if you are intolerant and you're taking it in, this represents one of those hidden sources of inflammation in the gut. I talk a lot about food sensitivities and things on these webinars because it's like, let's remove as many inflammatory compounds, toxic compounds from your body as we possibly can. You'd be surprised just targeting the inflammation component, how well that aids fat loss. I'm telling you, people are walking around, some of them just inflamed, and it's like tissue inflammation going on. And it really seems like fat storage, but sometimes it's tough to differentiate between water and fat. And inflammation will pull water into your tissues as well. So it's like, just getting, the blood sugar under control, that's great. Getting the hormones under control, that's great. Then getting the inflammation under control, and we've done a lot of great webinars about that. That independently can help you get the needle moving with weight loss.
So I want to jump in to the questions and the question and answer, because we have a lot of fabulous questions that people have been putting in. And again, appreciate this. If you have any others, please put them in the Q&A. So our first question is, which genes tell us if fasting will benefit us? What do you look at when it comes to fasting?
So I look at it more from the perspective of, is this person going to have blood sugar issues, genetically speaking? So I would say TCF7L2 is one of those ones. However, it doesn't really indicate if it's going to be a risky protocol. What I look at for that is the clinical correlation side of things about how does this person live? Right? Does this person have an eating disorder? I might not go the fasting route for people who have issues controlling that element. If the FTO as well as the MC4R, those are both great indicators there as well. I look at if they're underweight, right? I mean, that's one of those things. Or if they're a teenager, I'm not going to recommend a heck of a lot of fasting. But it's more of a balancing act between what their lifestyle is, what they've tried so far, and what a few of those genes indicate. But there's not an N=1 gene associated with will fasting work, yes or no. By the way, the True Diagnostics test does have some factors in there to show caloric restriction as far as how well is that going to work for you. And fasting is a way of manipulating caloric restriction as well. But we don't have an N=1 for that. Do you have anything different that you look at for fasting protocols?
Actually, not really. It is a lot of background, speaking with the client, if this is appropriate for them, as you have already very succinctly described, where are they in their hormones? Is this the best step forward or best technique to use at this time? So because there's a lot of foundational things that if you're not sleeping very well, intermittent fasting or shifting in a time restricted feeding can actually help to improve sleep. Maybe not, maybe someone needs a little, protein or fat before they go to bed if their blood sugar is tanking in the middle of the night. So there's a lot of different things to look at, but overall, certain ways of fasting, and there's a lot of different kinds of fasting. We've actually done a couple of webinars on this, explaining and going through the different types of fasting. It can be beneficial, but it is certainly something that I would work with a practitioner who knows your history. So that way, you can see and ask all of these questions, get these questions answered to see which form of fasting would be best for you, or even if it's an option for you. So, all right, next question. So Deborah is asking, if you have the AMY1 suboptimal gene, would taking digestive enzymes support the breakdown of starches in the mouth? And yes, but there are some limitations, because supplemental digestive enzymes that contain amylase, when they're often labeled as amylase, they can technically break down starches, but most of these commercial digestive enzyme supplements are designed to work in the stomach, not in the intestines and mouth. So it's just realizing that, yes, this can work. Yes, this can be helpful. It is still a matter of chemically digesting the starches, but realizing the limitations and where it's working. So when you're talking about that salivary phase, the AME1 gene that we're talking about, this part of the digestion is very unique because, again, it's working while you're chewing. You're thinning out the starchy texture and breaking it down. You're beginning that breakdown process. So, people with high AME1 activity notice starches. It's sweet. Like if you have a cracker or bread, it will actually taste very sweet in your mouth as you're breaking it down. That's one quick and easy way to tell. And obviously, if you don't, well then there's a bit more poor digestion. But to be honest, using a digestive enzymes can be very helpful. So let's see. Next question. Nalani is stating, okay, for most of my life, I've had very high metabolism, was underweight, and could eat anything I wanted. Post-menopause and the jab, I have gained 30 pounds and can't seem to lose it no matter what I do. What happened? Can DNA change with age? Change because of the jab? Okay, well, I am going to mention one thing, that your DNA does not change with age. Your DNA is your DNA. Standard in the trillions of cells that you have that make up your body. Your DNA is the same from when egg and sperm came together to the day that you die. So as far as changes with the jab or with any type of virus or anything, any DNA changes that may happen are very localized to very specific cells. Just like with radiation or anything like that. Yeah, it can break down and cause damage to the DNA. But again, that's very localized to very specific cells. It doesn't change your entire DNA. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear in the understanding of how DNA works. Now, Justin, I'm going to hand over to you the other part of her question to maybe briefly discuss about, hey, post-menopause, after the jab, doing things like this, I gained weight and now I can't lose it. So what can you share with your brilliance about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talked a lot about hormone regulation when it comes to this. And, if you have estrogen dominance and things like that going on, and then all of a sudden, you're premenopausal and everything surges. And then you go into menopause and progesterone and all of these things tend to slow down. I think that can certainly make it a much more difficult circumstance to get that tightness in the body because you don't have that support of a lot of these hormones. And then because you're lacking them, some people will jump on BHRT, which I think is usually a good call if it's directed properly. But it's difficult to know what the metabolites and things like that are going to look like if you don't have your genes, as well as things like Dutch testing on hand. I'll share that I think that the jab represents an epigenetic input that has caused a lot of additional toxicity, which it's not the DNA that you're changing, like Dr. Laura mentioned, but you have introduced something that's going to represent additional toxin load on the body, right? I mean, toxic spike proteins are not helping any of us lose weight. I think that can represent something that is going to make it a little bit harder for your detox processes to do their job. And that's going to have a trickle down effect of making it a little bit harder to achieve ideal body composition. I'll share, we do have a long COVID program as well that really can be either for, people that just took several jabs or just have, experienced issues with long COVID. And if that's you, if you're still being affected by that, be the jab or COVID itself, maybe look into a program like that and get those detox processes working a little bit better. That can also be very useful. But I recommend making sure that with the hormone piece, you're also avoiding a lot of these environmental estrogens. You know what I mean? Like there's so many different endocrine disruptors that I think are actually causing a little bit of difficulty with people when it comes to weight loss. Like they're so prominent. You go to the gym and people like working as hard as they can at the gym. And then you go in the locker room and they're spraying toxic stuff all over their body. And you're like, you're disrupting your own endocrine system after doing something so good for it. So, programs and these kinds of things that we sell at the DNA company help you to sort of navigate that because we have your steroid hormone pathway on hand. And that helps a lot. And it's one of those things that can really guide therapies and things like that, including BHRT. So before I ramble too much longer, though, that's my initial thoughts on that. Anything to add to that? I mean, there's a lot of directions you can take that when it comes to hormones and spike protein jabs.
Right. I mean, again, it really comes down to inflammation, between toxins, between dysregulated hormones, inflammation, it's putting pressure and stress on the body. And a way that the body protects itself is, or I should say, between protecting itself, but also in its response is holding on to that fat, because fat acts as a way to store the toxins. It holds on to that. Toxins are stored in fat. And that's why you also have to be careful about the foods, the sources of meat, and other animal products that you are eating, like salmon. Salmon is fantastic, great source of omega-3s, but you also have to be careful about mercury toxicity. Okay. With cows, you don't want to be eating beef steaks from cows that have been pumped full of hormones, like what Justin was just talking about. You are getting these endocrine disruptors. You are actually taking in hormones, okay, which is going to disrupt your own hormone balance. So knowing where the sources of toxins, of endocrine disruptors, of estrogen mimetics, of, all of these different types of toxins that are causing more inflammation, that are causing more issues with your body, that is going to make a huge difference in how your body is reacting. Mold, if you're living in a moldy home, that's going to impact your ability to lose weight. If you have parasites, if you have, gut disruption, that's going to affect your ability to lose weight and to absorb nutrients for your body to repair and to be working efficiently.
Yeah, can I rabbit hole really quick on the hormone piece when it comes to animal products?
Okay.
Because there's actually a pretty significant percentage that can mess with your metabolism because so they have these little hormone pellets called, I think it's called zearalenone, and they put it in the ear of livestock and it can increase what
Oh,
they call, like, have you
yes.
seen that? Yeah.
Yes.
So they talk about something called feed efficiency, which means like if I feed livestock X amount of calories, they gain X amount of weight. If I put this little hormone pellet in their ear, it can increase feed efficiency by up to 30%, which means it gains up to 30% more weight on the same amount of calories just by manipulating the hormones, right?
Mhm.
So that's how relevant that is. I really try to make sure that the animals I'm eating were not manipulated in these ways. A, it's cruel to the animals, but B, my body is going to be, impacted by what I ate there. So making sure that you're not eating these CAFO, animals is really important.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, yeah, I knew about that. And I mean, it's just shocking, how that works. So it almost throws the calories in, calories out theory out the window, but we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because that still is important, that you are burning more calories than you're taking in, but also realizing these other components that can directly affect fat gain, fat loss, and your ability to have that homeostasis. So we've got another question, and I'm going to kick this one over to you because you are beautiful in this realm. So Wendy is asking, so far all of her genes are suboptimal, and especially her AME1. She says, I have faulty detox pathways. Would it be best to do a very strict diet such as paleo or Mediterranean to get my body into a thermogenic state?
Interesting. Yeah, I think those are both fantastic diets at a baseline. What I would say is that they're still going to need some personalization because, a paleo diet really encompasses such a broad spectrum of foods. I mean, you can do higher carb paleo, lower carb paleo. You can do it with or without a fasting element. If you have nothing but sweet potatoes covered in honey, that's a paleo meal, right? And you could do that 3 squares a day, and you're probably not going to be doing your metabolism a lot of favors. Same with Mediterranean. I mean, there's a lot of higher carb versions of a Mediterranean diet. But I mean, the actual like kind of lower carb Mediterranean diet with just low glycemic veggies and high quality animal proteins and things, I think it's a great starting point. What I would say is that I recommend incorporating food sensitivities into any of these diets that you might try, because if inflammation and detox are a problem and you jump on a Mediterranean diet trying to aim for a large spectrum of different types of plants, not knowing that 20% of them you're actually totally sensitive to and it's still creating inflammation, I would say that's still going to end up a suboptimal result. If you're doing a diet for the purpose of detoxing and not knowing that information, it's a step forward and a step backwards. So, a coaching call is likely in your interest as well, because we could also dive into a heck of a lot of other detox pathways and things like that. But those are both fantastic diets. They're both real food diets, but I would at the very least pair it with a food sensitivity screening. That way you can kind of tailor it that much more and make sure that everything you eat is going to digest properly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So our next question, Cynthia is asking, what are optimal, suboptimal FTO genes? And I can answer this very quickly. So for FTO, which is the fat mass and obesity gene, so the A allele is suboptimal, the T allele is optimal. So if you have a TT, wonderful, it's working well for you. If you have AA like me, not so well. Or you could have an AT version, which is kind of like somewhere in between. So that those are the FTO genes. Okay, next question. Nina is asking, or she's stating at first, they say eat breakfast like a king, share lunch with a friend, and give dinner to your enemy. Is this a trap? Because lately she's been hearing how good it is to have light juices or smoothies for breakfast and eat a big meal in the evening, because then the food is digested in a healthy way overnight and our digestive system is not overloaded in the morning. Basically, it's important to skip one meal in order to lose weight. Which one? Boy, yeah, that's, this pendulum swing when it comes to what's best, what really is going on there. Do you have, you've heard of this, I'm sure. Do you have some input? And then I'll throw in what some of the science says.
Yeah, so I don't think that there's an exact rule as to which one of those meals you skip. What I would suggest is seeing how your body responds, because for me personally, I have a very easy time skipping breakfast. I kind of like to sit my coffee down and like do shit until I actually get hungry. And at the moment, I'm on like a noon to 8 p.m. kind of a strategy, doing the 16 and 8. But for me personally, if I don't have a big dinner, like that last meal of the day, if it's not big, I go to bed thinking about food and I find that it's disruptive. Like I can't go to bed hungry. I can wake up hungry and stay hungry till like noon, and it's not a problem because I'm busy. For me, it's like that FTO thing. I think it starts to kick in later in the evening, and I tend to have worse sleep if I don't eat at a certain point. I like to kind of manipulate the windows such that I'm performing well. I tailor it to when my workout is. I tailor it to when my sleep and wake schedule is. So it's really more of a matter of experimentation. I would never give my dinner to my enemies. I mean, that's just a fact. Like that's mine. Um, I'm more likely to give my breakfast to my enemies than I would with my dinner. So I think it's kind of an individual thing. You don't want to give your body too much abundance signaling, nor do you want to give your body too much scarcity signaling. And that's what that balancing act is when it comes to time restricted eating. We don't want to overstimulate mTOR, right? Because tissues grow with mTOR, and sometimes tissues we don't want to grow will grow with mTOR. We want to balance it out with something called AMP kinase, right? So that's that other nutrient signaling kind of thing in the body, to where we want to have that be present and then have enough mTOR to make sure that we're preserving muscle tissue and things like that as well. So paying homage to that balancing act, but then just getting the schedule that works best for you. where my workouts are good quality, my sleep is good quality. I get a little hungry, but it's not too bad. And then when it comes time to break it, I'm getting enough nutrients such that my body is not starving at any point. So make it work for you. That's my advice. What does the science say, though, Dr. Laura?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you're talking about the timing, so there are different um, modes of thought, but the fact that eating a large breakfast jumpstarts your metabolism and can provide sustained energy. And that comes from some research out of Northwestern medicine. But then you also have to consider the metabolic advantage. So some studies show that body burns twice as many calories digesting food after breakfast than after dinner when meals have the same amount of calories. So here is some research that benefits a larger breakfast. All right. When you talk about blood sugar benefits, glucose and insulin responses are typically healthier after a large breakfast versus a large dinner. So when we look at eating most calories later, so here's some newer advice. Circadian rhythms matter. So our bodies process food most efficiently earlier in the day, but eating late or larger dinners actually has been linked to increased hunger, lower fat burning, and more fat storage. That actually comes from a study from Harvard Health. Now, late eating and weight gain, there are several studies that suggest eating big meals late in the day or at night encourages weight gain, disrupts sleep, metabolism. It's something that I also had heard and read some papers regarding your gut, okay, the gut microbiome. At night is when they do cleaning, when they're working on your immune system in a repair. If they're busy processing and digesting food, they aren't doing the other cleanup work as much. I know for me personally, I feel better when I skip a breakfast or eat my first meal of the day around 11, 12, 1, somewhere around there. And there are some short-term benefits, because that can actually help you consume fewer calories. It is and can be linked to increased hunger later, especially for sweets, which can lead to overeating, poor meal quality. All right. Skipping lunch, similar effects. All right. Skipping dinner. Some studies suggest that skipping dinner reduces daily caloric intake with the smallest negative impact on diet quality. So for me, I know, and for other clients, and sometimes you do have to work and see what works best. But I find where if I skip breakfast or have a coffee, but I have more of a larger lunch, that first meal, I'm set, got lots of energy. I like eating my dinner earlier. I sleep better, I feel better, and I do lose weight if I have an earlier dinner. If I'm done eating by like 6 o'clock. I found, and using my Oura Ring, using other devices and other utilities to measure this, I found that it has been better if I eat earlier in the evening and then fast the rest of the night, where I definitely feel the difference if I end up eating 8:30, 9 o'clock at night and eating heavier. I feel more bloated. I don't feel as good. And I have found several clients have felt the same way. So it's really finding what works for you. And also your blood sugar regulation, looking at the genes, and then, being able to assess from there. So, and I think that this is a great question, and diving into it a little bit deeper is very important because everybody is wondering, deals with this. And, so thank you very much for that, Nina. Okay, so Jan is asking, I thought apple cider vinegar was for carbs, but you're saying for protein as well. Can you speak into that?
Yeah, so it's really it's a twofold thing. So the reason why they say it for carbs is due to what Dr. Laura was saying with regard to the blood glucose disposal component of apple cider vinegar. The reason why I think it's also useful for protein is because it does aid your body in releasing some hydrochloric acid as well. right? So that's something that really helps and aids that protein digestion alongside things like proteolytic enzymes. So apple cider vinegar is pretty magical. I mean, there's quite a few little things that it can actually do, and a little spoonful of it prior to a protein heavy meal will help you because it's increasing acid levels. And I'll tell you, if you have that, what's it called, hypochlorhydria, when you have like barely making stomach
Right.
acid. Yeah. Oh my gosh, like that can wreak havoc on your digestive tract, not having enough acid in there. And we've seen that, if you have low amounts, it means that your body's not going to be able to really process and assimilate nutrients. A great marker that you can look at for this is called indican, like INDICAN,
Mhm.
and that's associated with protein, putrefaction and really how well your body is actually breaking it down. And if it's not being broken down properly, then we need to look at that. Is there some sort of a liver issue going on, or do you have not enough HCl, not enough proteolytic enzymes? But I'll tell you, apple cider vinegar, as far as an inexpensive solution to that, upping the acid levels, fantastic. And especially if you get an organic source that is not owned by Bill Gates.
There you go. All right. So another question we have from Cynthia. She's asking, what are the optimal, suboptimal MCM6 genes? So the MCM6 has to deal with lactose tolerance. So the A allele is optimal. That means that you, if you have like an AA presentation, this means that you have retained lactose tolerance, genetically speaking. If you have a G allele in there, so either a GA or a GG, this means that you are moving toward being partially lactose intolerant or lactose intolerant, genetically speaking. But again, being careful about just looking at that and say, oh, well, I can't have any dairy. Well, yeah, it might have some problems, but like Justin said, and I have found this too, we've had clients with GG presentations who can handle and digest dairy, so, or lactose, I should say, which is in dairy. So again, it's more than just the single gene, but that does have underlying, consequences or weight to it. So that those are the genetic presentations for the MCM6 gene. All right, next question. Wendy's asking, what about the gene that lacks the ability to make enzymes to break down macros? And I am going to answer this one as well, because these are what we've been talking about. So your macros are your proteins, your carbohydrates, and your fats. So for we talked about the AME1 for your carbohydrates, your ApoA2 for your fats. Proteins, there isn't necessarily a specific gene like the ones that I mentioned for the other macros that say, hey, this is how well you break down proteins. We look at more the genes in your detoxification system and these pathways on how the proteins are prepared. How well do you deal with or clear the toxins that can come with these cooked proteins? And that can actually help you to determine your sensitivity, where you need support, but also, if you're a really poor detoxifier, I really wouldn't be cooking your meats on high heat where you are, having these carcinogens or, over a grill in the blackened, because of the charring. You're not going to handle that as well. So that's where we really focus on that. All right. So Justin, last question. I'm kicking this over to you. So Ruben says, what does a low fat, low carb diet look like?
Okay, so it's going to be not a no fat, no carb diet. It's going to be a low carb, low fat diet, right? So that's a really important indicator because, like, when we see these genes and we see that we're not optimal for either one, which happens pretty regularly, it's very discouraging to people. They think, well, I'm not welcome to eat food. I guess I'll just fast until, and that's not what it is, right? It's more about how are we going to manipulate this to A, improve your metabolism of those two macronutrients with the different things that we've discussed. It could be lipase for fats and carnitine, or it could be amylase, it could be carb cycling, only taking some in after workouts so you get better glycogen replenishment and use it a little bit better. What I would say is that it looks like leaner proteins and then kind of just your lower glycemic veggies, and letting the fats sort of naturally occur without adding a whole bunch in on purpose. Right? It's like, okay, there's a bit of fat to the meat there. And okay, I cooked this with a little bit of olive oil in there. It's okay to still take some in if you have a suboptimal gene presentation. Your body requires it. Your hormones require it. Your cell membranes require it. Don't think it doesn't. But we're just not going to on purpose do a keto approach. We're not going to go fat heavy on purpose, nor are we going to go carb heavy on purpose. We're going to keep everything low glycemic. We're going to manage your blood sugar with, a continuous glucose monitor and some of these strategies we talked about. We might add in a fasting element, and just find a way to make sure that we're still getting the macro and micronutrients that your body needs to run and thrive, right? So to me, protein prioritization is a pretty good baseline place to start there. And then just kind of letting the other macros naturally occur, but don't go out of your way to add them in. This is a great opportunity to have a coaching call, because we can really see your food, mood, poop journal, and all these kinds of things are pretty handy for that as well.
Well, thank you so much for that. And it is always a pleasure. I love doing these webinars with you. Your practicality, your advice, the experience that you have, it is just so genuine, so useful. You've got such wonderful pearls that I hope our audience has listened to and can start implementing for themselves. And we encourage all of you that if you haven't gotten your DNA 360 done yet, and you are now, your appetite is whetted, and yes, I did mean to put that in there. Please, reach out. We've got our salespeople where they can help you navigate. And if you're interested in a program, let us know. We even have a fantastic DNA Fit program with Felicia. If you're looking, how can I work in exercise? Because the movement of the body, the exercise is really important when you want to start losing fat, losing weight, building lean muscle mass. Your diet is an important aspect. And yes, your genes are very much a part of that, but you can't exercise your way out of a bad diet. But you need a good exercise program to complement the good diet that you are now creating for yourself. So
yeah, that's why it's the alignment process, right? And what did I say? Energy, thoughts, and actions in alignment with the result that you're looking to attain. And that's all encompassing, right? The way that you wake up in the morning and what does your activities look like. So just be in control of all those epigenetic factors, and you'll get moving forward. And thank you, Dr. Laura, because this is so much fun for me. Every time I see that we're on the docket, it's you and me, I'm like, whew, this is going to be a good one.
Awesome. And thank you, audience, for staying with us. We hope you're walking away with some great information. We are here for you. If you have questions, if you have comments, if there is something that burning desire of information you want to learn about, please let us know. So thank you. Have a beautiful night. Thank you to our people who are working very hard and diligently in the background, who help us do all this. Vanny, Katie, Jonathan, Bill, you guys are awesome. Have a beautiful night, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, folks. See you soon.